be on their National Review Board for the elimination of the sexual abuse of children by clergy. His writings include Genes, Brain, and Behavior, essays on assisted suicide and the misuse of psychiatry, and his newest book, The Mind Has Mountains, published in 2006 by Johns Hopkins University Press, which will be available for sale throughout the weekend. Please join me now in welcoming Dr. Paul McHugh, who will speak to us tonight on how a psychiatrist approaches the illusion of technique in healthcare delivery today.
Thank you very much, Kate, and I appreciate it. And let me just see if I can get this computer to do its thing for me. Michael, I might need help to get to the slide. There it is. Actually, I have a slightly different title than was given, but to some extent it's the same thing. We're going to talk tonight about the issues of technology as applied to bioethics and bioethical issues, and to bioethics itself. And the issue of technology has both its mechanical and its conceptual issues. And it was the conceptual issues that I'm going to is the ones I'm going to attend to. And I have to tell you that I'm not really a bioethicist. I was brought into this through a variety of things I said and did. And Leon Cass brought me onto the council. And so if I say things that don't sound like mainstream bioethics, to use Ruth Macklin's term, it's for two reasons. One, I don't believe in consensus science anyway. And secondly, I'm not a bioethicist. I'm just an ordinary psychiatrist. And so the talk that I'm giving to you today is fighting mind-forged manacles of technology through two stages in the history of bioethics. Let's see if I can get this to do its thing for me. How do I advance it? Where do I advance? I'm pressing away. It worked. Okay? All right. No, it skipped one. I'm going to go back one. Yeah, there it is. Okay, now I think I'm with it. Okay. All right. You're with me and I'm with you. How did this story begin for me? How did I ever get into this? Like many other people, I was enthusiastic for bioethics, particularly at its beginnings. Like many other physicians, I sensed the tendency in medicine to mistreat human subjects in research and cheered the bioethical criticisms encouraging informed consent as just and progressive medical practice. I also witnessed the confusions of technique in pain management, particularly pain management in terminal cases and its resolution. And, the doctors were very confused. They thought, well, should we help the person with pain, or should we produce addiction, or what we're doing? They were all messed up. And it was wonderful to have, through a variety of processes, one of which was led by a student of mine, Kathy Foley, to bring us understanding of what we should be doing in helping terminal cases. And bioethics played an important role in that. I certainly knew the allure of technology for doctors and how often technology both gave and took away. Whenever the technology built up and became more and more a crutch for the physician, when an illness carried a patient beyond the reach of the technique or technology, what happened was the other side. A sense of futility came over the doctors, and they didn't know what to do, because with the technology, they'd lost the non-technological skills of the profession that brought them there in the first place. Perhaps the best example of that was how neurology, which I studied and I am a neurologist too, began as a discipline in which you really examined the patient closely, took careful histories with them, and then defined and decided where the illness was, where the disease was in the brain. Now we have PET scans, CAT scans, MRIs. The patients get rolled into these dark tunnels. They get pictures taken of their heads, and the doctors seldom examine them until after the pictures are done, and then they don't quite know how to examine them after they've done so. And there's a tremendous loss there, particularly with the kinds of conditions neurological patients suffer from. So I know that, and you know, I celebrated the attention to practice that bioethics brought. Bioethics seems such a natural collaboration between the physicians and this emerging theme at the time. The descriptive side of bioethics, particularly their description of the human experience, drew doctors' attention to certain vulnerabilities in the doctors' stances towards their patients, and this led to progress, led to considerable progress. And Dr. Solomon talked a bit about that this evening at dinner. Indeed, I thought it was so natural that such a discussion emerged as a richer and better understanding of the relationships between doctors and patients, and particularly emphasizing issues of inequalities in power in the situation, and to a considerable degree, these unintended consequences in actions. I'll come back and talk a little bit about the unintended sense of paternalism that occurred there. And the theme of that enterprise, this stage of bioethics, was that the doctors had been held by mind-forged manacles. I'll come back. I'm sure you all recognize where that's from, but I want to pick up that theme and where that came from and why it's important. And they were thus, because they were kind of grasped by their own technology, they were implicated in practices from which they were freed when their attention was drawn to richer sources of meaning in medicine. The doctors, though, at that time were very active in it, in the very fact that these, and I'm just listing a few of them, all the people that I met at one time or another who worked with Henry Beecher, Francis Moore, Kathy Foley, Cecily Saunders. Cecily Saunders, you know, the person who built the hospice move and all, were very actively involved in these bioethical exercises and gave them shape. They gave the exercise shape. It wasn't abstract because these doctors were not only there but were listening to what was being described. These folk, after all, knew the technologies through and through, even as they were dealing with the problems of daily practice in medicine and surgery. There was another promise, though, of bioethics at the time. It was more muted at first. It promised to address the issues of how advances in biotechnology could alter our lives even more fundamentally, and to draw attention to what those things would mean, as in the reproductive technologies from IVF on, end-of-life care, cosmetic psychopharmacology, kind of things that Kyle was talking about today, sex change surgery, choice of sex, that was also mentioned, and many other things. This was the other side of bioethics that was talked about how things were going to be helped. It was with these issues that a more challenging bioethics emerged, and with it there was more partisanship in the enterprise, in the interactions between doctors, bioethicists, and the public, for that matter. And bioethics began to take on a more prescriptive activity with important social implications here. And it did rest on philosophical assumptions of its own as to the place and purpose of medical enterprises, for which they could find medical allies, but not exactly the same kind of medical champions that they had found before. The terms justice, beneficence, autonomy, and gradually became mantra-like expressions in bioethical discourse, and I have to say that as I was watching it, again, not an expert, but an outside observer, bioethics became a technology itself, with its own experts, its own claim to authority, its own parties, its own journals, its own concepts of what was mainstream, and therefore a deep and abiding partisanship. It was with this that a second stage in bioethics emerged. And it emerges not simply from the bioethics itself, but from the sense from observers that in some of its proposals, like any technology, bioethics is devising a new set of mind-forged manacles for medicine and its practitioners. And a concern emerged that in its broader public aims and purposes are advanced by insinuation rather than from broad public appeal and understanding, debate, and the like. Just, we think this way. We ought to think this way. Good people think that way. This is the scientific way. You can hear arguments like that. The thing behind this second stage, that I noticed anyway, is that the truth is that a professional bioethics with prescriptive roles and target aims, justice, beneficence, and autonomy as some of their slogans, has now great authority in medicine and science. And you know, you heard about that through today. The result is that the quiet first stage, where bioethical expertise was accepted at its face, just on its face, was ending. Look, doctors are fraught with guilt. They're always sure they're not quite doing enough. And if somebody comes along and says, we're going to show you how to be more ethical, they're very likely to open the door, because we're always looking to do better. And that's what I meant by the face of bioethics, the face validity of it. And the fact that it worked so well at first was what gave momentum to begin this, to open up this new movement and ultimately the second stage. Because ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, every exercise in shaping medical practice and social attitude towards medicine must prove itself. Just saying you're for good and you're going to make medicine better, or you're going to illuminate the public, if you want medicine to be behind you, you've got to prove it. You can't just say it. And that's where the second stage has come. We're in the stage of criticism, asking for a better bioethics through a critical stance on what we claim, what we know, and what we advance. And my question to you is, with a bioethics, and I'm going to say, we'll soon call the new stage the post-cast stage. That'd be enough to infuriate half the room. But the truth is that something really happened back in 2001 besides 9/11. And that was the founding of this council, Council on Bioethics. And this is the order for it. And Leon Cass brought it together. And there are a number of things that are important. And I want to go over what was done here in an effort to bring on a richer bioethics and an understanding of bioethics. A bioethics that's prepared to say consensus isn't enough. We're going to prove our value. And the most important thing that many of us emphasize is to note the title. This was a council entitled A Council on Bioethics. That preposition is very important, both for itself and what it indicated. There were previous councils, previous presidential councils on bioethics. There were 3 of them, actually, but they were different. They were different in important ways. First of all, in their title, they were called the National Bioethics Advisory Commission, for example, one of them was. And their membership, specifically, they consisted of experts in bioethics. People who had a track record were founding members of the bioethics movement. And their charges were different. Charges are different than the ones I'm going to show you. Primarily, they were charged with things like human subjects research. You know, not bad things, but different from a critical stance. The implication from this title was that this council will think about whether and how bioethics is benefiting the medical profession and our lives in general. That's what the implication of the title was. The membership was a rich membership, a remarkable membership. It had some bioethicists, people who would define themselves as bioethicists and were founding members of places like the Hastings Institute and things of that sort. But it was also a very diverse council. It had Democrats and Republicans on it. It had political scientists, and it had philosophers, and it had people who had never done much with bioethics. It had some of the most distinguished scientists in our country. Elizabeth Blackburn, Janet Rowley, Michael Gazzaniga. These are people who are in the first rank of American science. It had Michael Sandel, the most popular political scientist and perhaps most popular teacher at Harvard College. He teaches a course on justice, and he used to teach the course with Larry Summers. I don't know what he's going to do now for a backup, but Larry Summers and he used to teach this course on justice in Phil Sanders Theater. It had Daniel Foster, probably one of our most distinguished internists in America, a very gifted student of diabetes, Francis Fukuyama, Mary Ann Glendon, the learned hand professor of law at Harvard, a diverse group of people to consider bioethics now with help, but primarily as the public, an informed and super public, I'll grant you, but the public nonetheless. Where did I come in? How did I get on that list? Those people. I mean, it was awe-inspiring to meet some of them. I was appointed to the council, but was far from an expert in this business. You know, I had known Leon. I'd met Leon before, but I was wonderfully pleased. And I finally came to, in discussion with him, to ask, well, you know, what was it that I brought? And he felt that I should be viewed as a psychiatrist who had studied new disciplines and authorities within my field. You know, I've spent an awful lot of time talking in my discipline and trying to find the places where psychoanalysis, behaviorism, all kinds of various forms of therapy, including pharmacological therapy, go right and wrong out of a consideration of a thoughtful knowledge of the discipline. And since I had worked in that way, he had challenged a variety of conceptions that had become technologies in my field and brought them to the test, I think that's probably why I was asked to at least join in the conversation. But I have to tell you, the bottom line is that I found the mission statement, the mode of proceeding, and the products of this council powerful and of historic importance. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you tonight about it in detail in this way was to make it clear why it was and will be considered, I think, a historic moment in bioethics and ultimately in the public discourse. And bear with me if I go over things which are obvious to you, things you know and appreciate, but I want to be sure that we're on the same page of understanding just how a method went forward under a particular leadership in a particular direction. So let me just quickly run over what the mission statement was. I'm going to break them down individually and show you. But the mission statement itself, there are 5 elements of the mission statement. The first was to undertake fundamental inquiry into the human and moral significance of developments in biomedical and behavioral science and technology. Second, to explore specific ethical and policy questions related to these developments, to provide a forum for a national discussion of bioethical issues, to facilitate a greater understanding of bioethical issues, and to explore possibilities for useful international collaboration on bioethical issues. It's a broad and rich mission statement. Perhaps, though, the most telling element that followed close on after that was this statement in the mission. The Council shall strive to develop a deep and comprehensive understanding of the issues that it considers. In pursuit of this goal, the Council should be guided by the need to articulate fully the complex and often competing moral positions on any given issue, rather than by an overriding concern to find consensus. I want to emphasize that because the next sentence says the same. The Council may therefore choose to proceed by offering a variety of views on a particular issue, rather than attempt to reach a single consensus position. It didn't think, and didn't claim, and didn't wish for us to define a mainstream. It said, what's the issues, get them out, kick them around. Now, I'm going to go over the mission statement one by one. Point one, undertake fundamental inquiry into the human and moral significance of developments in biomedical and behavioral science and technology. I'm going to parse that with you. We were not simply to discuss whether a procedure was moral or immoral, but to consider what is at stake fundamentally, how particular biological techniques might change or distort such matters as our assumptions, our attitudes, and behaviors towards each other. That meant that our inquiry should go beyond assessing means to an end, what some people refer to, I think appropriately and perhaps wisely, as the thin bioethics, to think about implications embedded in the ends aimed at by the means, the richer bioethics, the things that came later. There was something more implicit in Charge 1. It was to requicken the deep concerns of bioethics, that is, where is biotechnology taking us, and judge whether the now ascendant bioethics establishment has enriched or impoverished our medical and biological and biotechnological discourse. It really said, bring on the challenges by a diverse membership and broad thought on these matters. Bring it on. Okay? Let's see what we've got. Point 2. Explore specific ethical and policy questions related to these developments. We were to go beyond theoretical issues and at least explore, it says here, what implications were obviously and specifically tied to both the means and the ends. So we weren't to neglect the means. And here rested the embryonic stem cell issue that generated the Council in the first place. I'm going to come back and talk about that. And the prominence of this issue, the stem cell issue, may have distracted all from appreciating the larger mission and the larger achievement of this Council. Point 3. Provide a forum for a national discussion of bioethical issues. This charge demanded the diversity of backgrounds of the Council members that I mentioned. If you were going to be a forum, you had to be a real diverse forum, and encourage them to articulate competing points of view. It underlined, in that sense, in this point 3, the recommendation to abjure any concern to find consensus. And I can tell you, this Council did become a forum spurring public discussion of issues and public discussion of itself, probably more than any other Council before. Point 4, facilitate greater understanding of bioethical issues. This charge identified a teaching responsibility and a need for publication, distribution, and review of our ideas. No, it wasn't enough just for us to sit there, even though we're on the internet and discussing. We were supposed to put some stuff out. And the response to this charge was noteworthy in the number and quality of the Council's publications. The Council produced 6 major books in 3 years, 3 of which were commercially republished. And the secondary products from members such as Cass's reviews of our work, the recapitulation of the reports done by people like Eric and the like, the New England Journal of Medicine debates in which I took part, but also in which Elizabeth Blackburn and Janet Rowley took part, Fukuyama's books, Gazaniga's books, all of that came out. And here's just the 6. 3 years, 6 books. A record, I think, for a government organization. And interesting in themselves. The upper group on the reproductive business, the bottom group on matters beyond therapy, and I'm going to come back to this Being Human book, a book of readings from literature related to issues of human dignity. Point 5. Explore possibilities for useful international collaboration on bioethical issues. Now, this was met with enthusiasm on all sides, here and abroad. We had, to the Council came, we had ministerial level, British, Canadian, and German visitors who revealed how matters were dealt with in their countries, and with much bilateral advantage from this kind of interaction of our conversation. We also sent members of our group abroad to represent us. The implications, what came of this out of Charge 5 in America, we're not so out of line. You keep hearing, we're going to hear a lot less after the Huang scandal that we're out of line. Now people don't think that maybe the best and the brightest are going to get up from America and go and live in South Korea anymore, but we used to hear that. The Council in its interactions abroad, the Council at any rate, this demonstrated that we weren't so out of line. We were maybe had different phases with other countries, but we weren't so out of line. For example, the British showed to us that they had put embryo regulations, things that we were calling for, embryonic embryo regulations, in place only after a pause, a moratorium of the scientists. Now, boy, have they got things in place there. They know where every egg is if it's not in somebody's body, and sometimes I think they know where every sperm cell is. I mean, it's amazing what they got. Now, why did they do this? That was the interesting thing that came out of it. The reason that scientists had the moratorium, and the reason why the British went along with it, the government went along with it, and the like, is that shortly before the emergence of this issue in reproductive technology, the British public learned that the British scientists had put genetically changed food on their grocery stores. When they heard that the scientists had put genetically altered Brussels sprouts out for them to eat, they went into a rage over there in Britain. And the scientists began to think that, the villagers were going to light the torches, they're going to come up the hill, they're going to put the laboratories in light. So whoa, wait a minute, we'll have a moratorium, we'll build a council, we'll get everybody to understand. Whatever their outcome was, they had a moratorium. Canada, the Assisted Human Reproduction Act was developed again after a moratorium on reproductive technology. This act is a wonderful act. It includes several ethically generated, legally enforced prohibitions, such as commercial trade in gametes. We still have commercial trade in gametes in our country, First began when I was at Harvard Medical School. I told them that no, thank you. I wanted to know my children and my grandchildren. Thank you very much. I don't have anything to do with them. But now, depending upon your SAT scores, you can sell whatever you want. In Canada, they won't have it. Also, the Act called for, and they're forging, a standing independent ethics forum that is going to do much the same kinds of things and discussions and draw people of all sorts into the Canadian discussion forum. Germany. From Germany, we learned that no in vitro fertilization can take place without implantation. You can only fertilize eggs that you're going to implant. You can't fertilize 7 or 8 and put 1 or 2 in and put the rest in freezers. They don't have any human embryos in German freezers, for obvious reasons, that they saw a moral problem that could develop later on, and they've had enough trouble with their issues over life. At least learn something. Okay, those are the implications from the mission statement. Well, how do we proceed? Because it was the method of proceeding that was very interesting. We had a free hand, ultimately, but were specifically asked by the president to begin with the stem cell cloning issue. It wasn't, perhaps, it wouldn't have been our choice, but he thought it was on everyone's mind, and it should be addressed first. It may have helped us attract the best and the brightest to the council because it was exciting, but it probably kept this council too long in the embryo wars, as Leon Cass refers to them. It probably did. We've become identified as an embryo council. That's people will soon realize that's not correct, but it's a slogan. But it did have the great advantage of refining our mode of procedure, going there into the most controversial and difficult area of biological science and bioethics, got our way of proceeding on track. And what was that mode of proceeding? With every issue, we stuck to the same plan. Most of each session was devoted to hearing from the scientific and clinical leaders, the best and the brightest, on any particular issue. We heard from the best. I mean, we had Francis Collins, we had Selko on Alzheimer's disease, we had Steve Hyman in psychiatry, we had we had Rudy Janisch from MIT, we had John Gearing in the stem cell area. We heard from them. We started with what they knew. We let them show us what they were accomplishing with their science, and it was where we began. And it was only after a thorough vetting of the science and the applications of the subject by clinicians that were close to the science did we on the council discuss any ethical or meaningful issues with these leaders and amongst ourselves. We tried our best to get up to speed on the science. We did work with outside bioethical consultants. We had our own people with experience like Bill Mayer, Rebecca Dresser, primarily to demonstrate, though, that these matters that we were talking about ultimately were matters that could be illuminated by public discourse amongst intelligent people rather than settled by experts. Okay, that was part of the on-bioethics. What could the diverse group of people that I was talking to you, that I showed you were members, could do? But what was the idea behind this process? Did this just spring up this way by accident? No, and again, I'm telling you things that you're probably very well aware of, but it fundamentally followed the sequence of development of answers that has really been the philosophical substructure of answers to questions like this in the West since the Greeks. And let me just remind you what the big 3 questions are and how they work out. There are 3 of them. The ontological question, what exists and with what features? The epistemological question, how do we know what exists and what are its features? And only then the ethical question, how should we act towards what we know exists with these features? Now you can see, if this is the structure by which you're working, there's going to be discussion at every one of these levels in order to get to the ethical question. What is the difference between the zygote and the SCNT product? Is this how do you know that there's a difference? Does that difference make any difference? All of those things come before and are discussed and generate argument in an effort to move towards something that will give a powerful, critical, and substantial ethical answer. That's the rationale behind it. That's how it worked to attack the technological that had been given to us. What were the results? Well, let me just tell you, it was exhilarating. I wish you could all have been there. All the meetings. They're on the internet, but it was exhilarating. We all learned plenty about science, but also about how people think over politically heated matters. It was, an introduction to not only a rich introduction with the leaders in the science, but also, how ought you to behave when things get really hot? Each member on the council emerged individually with his or her own mode of approach. It was a kind of group process in a fishbowl. And for a psychiatrist, it was a field day. And I can tell you that as each of these people began to emerge, some great Americans that people didn't know about appeared and are now well known to people. And that was one of the great things about the council. I don't think many people ever knew of Gil Mylander, and now everybody who has any interest in these subjects know Gil Mylander. People might have known who Mike Gazzaniga was because of his work on split brain work, that genius work that he did that won the Nobel Prize for somebody else. But nobody in America doesn't know Michael Gazzaniga now with his libertarian statements, and I think many people know Leon Kass, and who probably didn't know him before. The council did address matters in a very rich way, even bringing forth this book, Being Human, an anthology on classic literary readings that display human aims and purposes, ends, to give us an idea of what we mean by human dignity, but something else. The council wanted to attest something else with Shelley, that even today, the poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Now, when I say things like that to people and say, hey, look, Shelley was right, they want to know, well, what do you want to do? Give us the romantics back? Some of them know how to divide the romantics into the early three and the later three and things like that. No, that's not the point. The point here is to say that in the intercourse of how human beings should be treated, are treated, or respond to being treated, science and statistics tell us some things, but the poets, writ large, tell us something else and must be listened to. Let me give you a couple of examples. We know the Gulag and the tremendous loss of life and abuse that happened. We can read the numbers, but we know it much better. We know it as humans through the two bookend novels Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote about them. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, telling you the deepest level of the Gulag, and The First Circle, the description of the Gulag as experienced by the intellectuals who were imprisoned and used for Soviet purposes. We know the Gulag through that poet. We know the Holocaust in its numbers and the German efficiency, but we know it as people through Sophie's Choice in a way that we could never know it so well. Even slavery, our most shameful American enterprise, a slavery that corrupted us and the slaves, is not known simply from the numbers, but from Uncle Tom's Cabin. That book did much to let us know what was happening in an ethical way as humans. And recently, a hidden classic revealed the problems in American colleges, where the soullessness of neuroscience and the fundamental libidinal releases permitted in places that would celebrate the vagina monologues was brought forth by my friend Tom Wolfe in his I Am Charlotte Simmons, a poet telling you something about what was happening to us. I'm for the poets, and so should you be, and so will we on this council. We engaged, as I said, in a historic exercise that was telling and critical in mission, method, and breadth of thought. Its efforts are born as a post-cast stage in bioethics emerges. But what did it really accomplish? People say, well, what did it really accomplish? Enough of this, Well, it accomplished a number of things, really, in the real world. First of all, we drew a lot of attention. There was a lot of ink spilled on this council, let me tell you. We were in the pages of Science. We were in the pages of the New York Times. We were in the pages of the New York Review of Books. We were everywhere. Often, people wondering about us. Who are we? Science. They were puzzled about, they thought I was on one side and I turned out to be on another. That's all right. We widened the bioethical debates by bringing more information and interpretation on biotechnologies to light than ever before. We really brought a lot to light. And we irritated quite a few people from both ends of the political spectrum, I can assure you, and occasionally one another. The debates within each other were as much fun as the debates outside sometimes. But ultimately, we argued from examples that the technological details, conceptions, and applications of contemporary science, so necessary in themselves to comprehend, are not sufficient in themselves as foundations for a rich, full range of ethical thought and action. That's perhaps the most important thing. Science is necessary. You've got to know it. You've got to be familiar with it. You've got to work with it, but it isn't sufficient. You can't build a country on science. And finally, we established a better method for bioethical progress, I believe, a way of freeing ourselves. So, whither now in the post-cast stage? Well, first, the place for bioethics was certainly identified by this council, even though it was not constituted solely from experts. We certainly described biotechnical issues that call for discerning judgments over both their means and their ends, and we frequently heard that the public needs help to make these judgments. And we learned that organizations, at least I learned, Dr. Solomon mentioned it as well tonight, that organizations from biotechnical companies out to the Human Genome Project have hired bioethical experts, experts galore. But in this recognition, certain problems about this source of information became clearer to us. Perhaps the most important thing was that justice, beneficence, and autonomy as means of working with patients lost authority with us. They just petered out. They came to be seen more as slogans than as real principles. And it was the discussion of this kind of idea of how we treat our patients that was the beginnings, after all, and the richest of early bioethics. But we began to realize that the principles of practical discrimination do not come down from theory of doctors, but up as standards of excellence evoked by practice and experience within a strenuous, patient-centered discipline such as medicine or surgery. It comes up. These are practice-generated ideas. They come up out of the community of people of a similar practice and a similar experience. Yes, we need something from elsewhere to help us with this, but ultimately, you learn to be a doctor, and a doctor of character, a nurse of character, and that out of being with other nurses in the daily grind. And the question, What further help do doctors need than that from the practice community of fellow doctors and nurses? That's the question. You're going to have to answer it. They all, within the practice community, with similar shaping experiences and similarly evoked moral disposition, offer us daily reflections on our judgments. Look, I go to work in a clinic and on a ward every day. I practice with patients in front of nurses, social workers, fellow doctors, and the like. I deal with issues, and I hear from my fellows what they think I'm doing. And through that process over time, and as you can see with my gray hair, I've had a lot of time, we strengthen both our skills in caring for these, but also our character, and very particularly our moral agency, making us alert to dangers to life and justice in all of our actions, because we're with them. So the question is, what more? Where should we turn for more help? Listen, let me acknowledge that doctors vary in their character and responsiveness to human situations. I know that probably better than anyone in this room. And that patients certainly need people in their corner, like the people we talked about at the beginning, in what can be an unequal encounter with medical technology in a desperately vulnerable time for them, much as Eric talked about this morning. And acknowledging all of this, one can ask whether principles imposed by slogans help. Do you really make a better doctor by saying, be sure autonomy comes first? In fact, other sources of inspiration, again, the other source of inspiration, beyond the standard scientific fare and utilitarian assumptions of the postmodern era, need to be plumbed, it seemed to us. Indeed, the contemporary bioethical emphasis on patient autonomy has done harm, not just good. It probably did a little good, but done a lot of harm. Its products, and we can debate any one of these, include DNR orders, living wills, the new idea of futility directives, physician-assisted suicide. I'm not going to debate all of those things with you. Each one of them has its own arguments and its own conditions. But I can tell you that this last thing, this growing reluctance amongst newly trained doctors to provide firm guidance to their patients, again, what was discussed today. Patients, if the patients were coming to you just for information, they could go to the internet, gang. They don't have to ask you what you think and where you think they ought to go and what you'll do to help them get there. Here are the mind-forged manacles of today. They've come from slogans. I have to say that a bioethics establishment, this mainstream, is increasingly self-referential in that it now mostly appeals to its own authorities. If you don't publish in their journals, they presume that you don't have peer review. And it's bringing, I've probably overdone it with my adjective there, but it's brought a lot of sophistry to our public. In these challenging times, bioethical expertise must demonstrate exactly how it improves on what doctors learn directly from practical experience in the daily life of caregiving. It's going to be a better bioethics if you do it, but it's going to have to face it. Also, is expert advice the only source of help in seeking the richer bioethics? The first part, now practice, that's, I don't mean to disparage it, that's the thin bioethics. How do you handle things? Are you really developing a coherent moral agency in the daily practice that you exert? Are you getting better at this? That's important. A lot of it comes out of the practical experience. But for the richer bioethics, is expert advice the only source of help there? Thinking about, and as soon as you ask that question, you realize, well, maybe elsewhere, but not necessarily here in America, because thinking about the ends to be cultivated and promoted with biotechnology is a matter of public reflection. We, the people, decide where we'll allow biotechnology to take us. Although experts can help, government experts, biomedical scientists, and the bioethicists they hire cannot replace the people and their representatives. An informed, broad-based, political discourse Politics in the best sense about the proper relationships between science and our society is the only method that can identify, reflect, and respond appropriately to the differences of opinion that abound here. This method is not a party so much, but a process wherein debate, disagreement, and civil opposition gain standing against some received and dominated climate of opinion will both enlarge our grasp, organize coherent challenges, and protect us from the unquestioned dominance of vested interests and their technologies, both mechanical and philosophical, and ultimately turn us towards the other sources of humane direction, the poets. What we think is happening is the richer bioethics must derive from public conversations that are inherently political. We need forums constituted like this one, with broad representation, and that persist over time as Canada plans for its people. Bioethical experts are not excluded from that process, but like all experts, should be asked for the sources of their opinions and also who stands to gain if their opinions prevail. Cui bono lives here, just as Carl Elliott told you to think that same question in relationship to Big Pharma. Doctors and scientists must gain more experience with this process of the public and the public's representatives if they are to work with the public in evolving its judgments and develop trust in the political system as our best route. What did I conclude from this long experience, and what kinds of conclusions would I like to have you carry away about this form of technology? Like any discipline that proposes to affect medical practice, the discipline of bioethics will be asked to prove itself. Its professionals have been given free rein for some time, primarily because they face no strong challenges from any other sources of authority. And it's beginning to show in the partisan and ad hominem arguments that pass the debate now. You know, there are bioethicists out there that want to talk about who should be allowed into their circles and who should speak. And instead of thinking about what the arguments are, they use an ad hominem argument that they acknowledge is an ad hominem argument. They say they want to have people whose moral tendencies they know, and only those of a particular moral tendency are allowed in. We don't want that. And that didn't happen on our council. That's not debate. That's closing off things. Also, as Dr. Solomon said today, too many bioethical experts have become what I call court prophets. Remember, go back to Amos. Remember Amos from your Hebrew scripture? Tender of sheep and a manager of sycamore trees. And he said, the courts are filled with prophets that don't speak for anything but the king. And I'm going to go shame. That's what's happened here. We've got a lot of court prophets. They're getting big pay. They're everywhere. They have conflicts of commitment of the worst sort, and they have univocal philosophical postures. Even when they might disagree with whatever the company wants to do, they simply wring their hands a bit, and things go forward. Bioethics will be challenged to prove its value in the post-class era. Prove it. Its best response will be to follow the methods brought to light by the Council on Bioethics, in my opinion. Its eventual achievements, and the achievements will happen, and you young people, undergraduates now, interested in bioethics, you have a wonderful challenge ahead to make this discipline really what it can be, a discipline that goes through the fires of criticism, shares the criticism, shares those fires, rejoices in them because it clears and develops you. That will happen with you. And the mind-forged manacles of slogans to demonstrate we'll put them behind our truer and richer bioethics, drawing on those other sources of inspiration where the poets have a voice, as well as from science where their powers are to be found, can emerge to add value to medical practice and enhance the public and political reflections on the meanings and purposes carried by medicine and biotechnology to make our lives better and improve the life of our children to come. That's what I thought, and if you don't believe me, check it out. Thank you very much.
Well, it seems like Dr. McHugh has thrown the gauntlet down to us, and it seems like we are the people. We're the future of bioethics, I think, gathered here in this room, and let's start off with comments and questions.
Can you expand on what you meant by the post-cost era? I was a little bit confused by that.
Well, I can expand it. I mean, giving it to you all again. I think the mission statement, the methods of procedure, the way the results happen, that should be replicated again and again with all of these matters. You should know the science a heck of a lot better than you do before you begin to talk about the way you think things should proceed. I'm not talking about you, dear. I'm talking about all of us. But the you includes me. We need to understand this. Look, medicine and psychiatry, my discipline, is a complex discipline with plenty of important science to know. You don't get to be a psychiatrist by walking out into a field, putting your hand on a rock and say, I am a psychiatrist, and then proceed to criticize the discipline. You spend years doing like I did, taking it on the chin and working away, and eventually then you begin to see what comes about because you have answered some of the ontological question, some of the epistemological questions, come to the ethical question. Thank you. Yes, Emily?
Hi, Dr. McHugh.
Hi,
Erica Jackson
Erica.
from Notre Dame. When you put forth the challenge to us that we are to challenge bioethics to prove its value, who exactly are we? And how do we go about challenging it? Is this, do we need to change the media? Do we need to change our politics? Do we need to change the way we talk about it at undergraduate conferences or in classrooms? How do we go about doing that?
Well, look, I think not all of the above. I mean, look, I'm not out changing the politics of our country. I'm not a politician. I don't encourage you into that arduous field. But I do think that you should, as young people, do, in most other things, begin with a skeptical dispassion towards these matters. Be a little skeptical, and in that process, be brought to a position of authority in the questions you ask. But don't begin and stay, especially in this field, under some assumption that the Sibyl is speaking if they begin by saying, I'm interested and I am a bioethicist. These are principles of action that will make a difference, often good differences, but you should be critical of them and take the same stance that you're being asked to take in other disciplines that become practical and successful. From biology and chemistry out to various forms of political science. With undergraduates in those fields, I notice that they're very, very ready to be critical of authority. Be critical here.
Thank you so much. I have one further question. Would you mind speculating on what you think the ramifications will be to the field of bioethics and to maybe our understanding at large if we fail to do this?
I'm very optimistic. I'm full of optimism for them. because I've seen what's happened in other fields that went through a period of time of criticizing its methods. I think we're going to get to a point where we think of this stage, the precast phase, as a time of some interest and some enjoyment, but breaking down ultimately into a huge infrastructure with very few advancing ideas. That's really what we have now. You're going to tear that infrastructure apart, and we're going to be a vital field that is going to be able to answer to the American people about what it's doing and why it's doing it, and what kinds of tests we will accept to change and improve upon our policies. It will become more user-friendly on both sides of the equation. Okay?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes, Michael.
I really liked your point about bioethics as core prophets, even if it is lifted from Hebrew scriptures. And I was interested, though. I see a strong parallel between this point and something that's been going on in the environmental movement for the past number of years.
Yes.
Which is that you have a lot of, at some point, some corporate strategist somewhere realized, hey, if the problem is that all these scientists are saying we're polluting and need to change that, we should just hire our own scientists who say that we don't need to do that.
Yes, yes.
And so then all of a sudden everything becomes so muddy that you don't even admit that you're producing global warming and things like that. So my question is, how can that be avoided in bioethics? How can we weed through the science and find what's really...
Let me assure you, Michael, it cannot. And you should welcome the day when there are real scientists duking it out the way we duked it out on this council. What's happening in the environment, don't bemoan the present state of the environmental thing, because they don't all think we ought to sign the Kyoto Treaty. The fact that wherever you get it from, whether you think it's always from those nasty industries that gave work to your father and mine in the old days, or whether you think it's being encouraged by left-wing proto-Marxists that would change everything, and all that's nonsense. The real question is, what's the science really telling you? It will win the day, and you and I, in the area of the environment, we want it to be preserved. We know that the earth is a treasure, and we'll keep it, and the scientists will help us. In this area, it's the same thing. Yes, indeed. As long as we have a mainstream bioethics and another kind that they call conservative or what have you, bioethics is going nowhere. But when they begin to think, hey, Leon has a point, how are we going to answer him? Or if we think Ruth Macklin has a point, maybe we should sharpen our criticisms and make it clear what we mean when we speak about the poets. All of those things will get better, okay? I have to tell you that I'm the optimist on the council, and I think sometimes Leon is the pessimist, and we play off each other in temperament form. But the progress is happening right now. Thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm Blake Goodman from Texas A&M University, and my question is more of a point of clarification.
Yeah.
I think what I got out of it was that when, the Bioethics Council will discuss these issues, and then it comes down to the physician to determine, or to inform at what point, who becomes responsible for the bioethical decision in the end?
Yes. Well, we were not intended to find a consensus here. We thought that, the charge was spur public discussion on that. We have no authority. We think, we're told, well, you guys, you got power. We got no power. We got nothing. Only the conversation. And that conversation will turn itself into practical matters, I think, in various ways as people come to see how they can employ them. I think some of the things will happen in conversations in undergraduate places, and ultimately as well, some kinds of things will happen out at the domain where real things are happening. It will inform the Terry Schiavo debate if The mainstream will let some other points of view be expressed. It will make us more alert to what it means to talk about the persisting vegetative states. It will make doctors wonder about what their role is when they think that they're trying to give the patients something more than a menu. I mean, I have medical students that think that that's my job. I'm supposed to offer the patient a menu of treatments, and they could have it a la carte, or they could take the complete dinner, and I'm supposed to go along with it. No, that's not what I do. This is the kind of thing that's going to turn into practical things out of a thoughtful, coherent, developed youth that are committed by their vocations, not simply to bioethics, but to the practice of medicine and science in a way that's going to help our people.
Thank you.
You have another person behind you.
Dr. McHugh, I was wondering, are you concerned at all that the issues that the President's Council on Bioethics discusses so much are used by disingenuous politicians as political sound bites in elections? And if so, is it possible that the Council is doing more harm than good in facilitating the election of bad policymakers?
Well, first of all, the politicians use any kind of sound bites they're going to want, and they'll take it from any source they have. This council has Democrats and Republicans and all kinds of people on it, and look, ultimately, it is a political process. Your complaint is not with the council. Your complaint is the way political debate goes forward in this country, with the mainstream media deciding that the American people can't read a full and substantial article anymore. And we should be, you and I and everybody else, not in relationship to our bioethics, but in relation to our citizenship. We should be saying that, the enriching of the conversation that has come not simply because the Bioethics Council is there, but because of other things that entered the stream of the media, including the blogosphere, that, interesting domain of new developments, will get us beyond sound bites to really thoughtful citizenship. So, am I worried that some people misuse the council? Not at all. I don't see any evidence of it. Yes, ma'am?
Hi, Dr. McHugh. I'm Marcia Foy from Northwestern University, and I just wanted to explore your response. Sorry, I just wanted to explore your response to Michael's question a little bit earlier. You responded, or you said that we should turn to the question of what's the science say, and I would just like to sort of wonder or ask you to reflect upon the bias of the actual questions brought to the science.
Oh yes. Look, nobody said government was easy, okay? It's not easy to live in a free country. It's not easy to believe in democracy. We're learning that in spades, aren't we? I mean, democracy is a difficult business, and the elites are always ready to give up on it, okay? They're always sure that the people are too stupid to run themselves. But, my people and the people that all you came from got into boats, most of them, and started rowing from another place to get here. Why? Because they wanted to think that they could do it. And I think they can, okay? And so, yeah, some of this is sophisticated science, and some of it you really have to sit down and think about. And sometimes you need to hear various points of view about it. But, we've done it before, and we've done pretty good. Sorry?
I was wondering if there's anything you see as a potential problem in the way that the council functions right now. You did a lot of praise for it, but are there any critiques you have for the future of the council?
Excuse me,
Are there any critiques you have of the council?
Any critiques
worries that you have, potential?
Oh yeah, I have lots of critiques. I have lots of critiques of, I don't think that people should insult each other on the council, and we tend to do that a little bit. I think we raise the heat a bit if we say this is nonsense, or when we disagree on something, we call each other idiots, and things like that. I don't think that happens. And occasionally, things got out of hand. But look, those were 18 and 19 of alpha males and females, and what did you expect? Do I have other criticisms? Yeah, I have criticisms that it's, I think it's a shame Leon couldn't keep going. I mean, I'd love it to, but, he did great for 2 terms. That was enough. I don't think they listened to me enough. What else do I think? I think they quote me out of context. Various other kinds of things. Yes?
Hi. I noticed you talked a lot about people being overzealous about autonomy and patients and making their own decisions. Is there a good balance that we need to reach in healthcare?
Oh, sure. There's obviously, as I say, I think that a gesture in that direction was very important. But look, this issue of power is a postmodern issue. Let's figure out where this is coming. Why, in the name of heaven, amongst those big 3, they didn't put coherence here? Justice, beneficence, and autonomy are fine, but I go to a coherent doctor, a brave doctor, a hard-working, a tired doctor. I want him tired. I want him. Anyway, but I think there is a balance. I think there's a balance here. I don't think there's a balance on justice, but I think there probably is a balance on autonomy. And I think you ought to wonder yourself, why is it that suddenly this issue of power is so important to us, and to the point where it gets to be one of the big 3? And I mean, postmodernism, the real issue in postmodernism, since they don't believe in anything else, the only thing they believe in is power, and that's a problem for us. We've got to get beyond them. If you want to read any more about this, get my Mind Has Mountains book, and we'll duke it out. Okay?
Speaking of Mind Has Mountains, there's a representative from the bookstore out in the main lobby, and they will be selling copies of that book right now, right after we let out. And Dr. McHugh has graciously agreed to sign those copies. However, they only brought 25 copies. They have more at the bookstore, but they didn't bring them over. But they will bring them tomorrow. If you don't get one tonight, Dr. McHugh will sign it.
I'll be here tomorrow.
He'll be here all weekend long. So thank you for your attendance and your participation. I think the questions were great, in my opinion. I thought, the participation was fantastic. So we'll see you again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And be ready to go.
Huh?